since you know the research very well. So what's the relationship between memory and sleep exactly? What do we know so far?
Yeah, so it's actually very layered. There's a lot of different arms of this research. One of them, for example, talks about how we learn new things after sleep and how sleep deprivation prevents us from learning new information after a night of asleep or lack thereof. My research is mostly on how things that we've learned before are processed during sleep. So this process is called memory consolidation. And it's for almost 100 years since the first study came out, we've been aware that sleeping actually serves memory better than an equivalent time awake. Back 100 years ago, it wasn't entirely clear if it's just the fact that sleep is this lack of interference, so you don't have these new events happening. So maybe that is what we can kind of hang this idea of the improvement to memory on. But with time, it's became more and more clear that this is actually an active process. So there's something happening during sleep that actually cements these memories in our brains. From a neuroscience perspective, we know today that there's multiple different brain areas that are involved in encoding and retrieval of memories. Most notable and most famous is the hippocampus, and that hippocampus serves. So there's some debate about what exactly it does, but I think it's generally understood that it is the first and the most active area upon first encoding information, and then with time, its role changes. So with time, most of our memories are not as hippocampally dependent. They're not as dependent on the hippocampus, and instead there's this rich network of areas in the cortex, in the outer area of the brain, that instead kind of support these memories. And this process of consolidation is basically the process of the hippocampus, this deep area that's subcortical, that's deep in our brains, kind of training the cortex in these new memories. So that's what we think happens during sleep. During sleep, these memories that support these networks that support these memories in the cortex and the outer areas of the brain are trained based on the information that is encoded basically temporarily in the hippocampus. That's the main idea that's been around for about 30 years. And the role of sleep is, with time, understood better and better. And we know how some sleep-specific waveforms, such as the sleep spindle, which I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with, and slow oscillations, how the interactions between these different waveforms creates basically the envelope for this memory it's not exactly transfer, because the hippocampus is still highly involved throughout this whole period, but this communication between these two brain areas is supported by these multiple waveforms and their time course, their interactions, their co-occurrence. And that's basically how we think sleep improves memory, specifically for the process of consolidation.
Wow. So sleep is very important for memory consolidation. Does that mean we have to have high quality of sleep to help this memory consolidation? And if we lose sleep or the sleep quality for some reason is poor, so it can hurt our memory somehow?
Yes, so exactly. And specifically, it seems that slow wave sleep, the deepest stage of sleep with these in the EEG, you see these very high amplitude, low frequency waves. That specifically seems to be most important. There's a lot of studies linking slow oscillations to a lot of different things, not only memory, but other aspects. But in our field, it's very well established that slow wave sleep is most important, at least for the memories that we call declarative memories. So that those are memories that we can actively and consciously bring to mind, such as memories for facts, memories for events in our lives. So at least for these form of memories, slow wave sleep seems to be more important. I think the literature is a bit more muddy about these other forms of memory, such as the emotional valence attached to certain events, or motor memories, such as riding a bike, or such memories. So those memories that are not entirely in the realm of these declarative memories, these are not kind of the classic ideas of what we think about when we think about remembering something. Those might be also impacted by slow wave sleep, might also be impacted by REM sleep. Some studies implicate stage 2 of sleep, which is this intermediate stage of sleep in which we spend most of our nights. So it's really a bit muddier for that, for those specific types of memories. But the memories that are most studied and best understood are those declarative memories. And those are supported by slow wave sleep. And to go back to your question, then yes, lack of sleep and I would say socially induced sleep deprivation, which happens quite a bit. Those have quite a severe impact on slow wave sleep and its memory purpose. Yeah.
So it's interesting. I'm thinking based on the research, how it can apply to our day-to-day life, right? So let me see whether I understand this correctly. So if a student gonna have an exam the next day, they need to remember a lot of things. I know a lot of students tend to stay up late and catch up on the sleep, prepare last minute for the exam. Even some students gonna pull the all-nighter, right, to study. But sounds like since sleep is so important, especially deep sleep, which happened on the first half of the sleep. So if someone wants to have a good memory of the facts and reasons, they actually should protect their sleep. Yes. And that can help them remember those facts better. And on the other hand, I'm thinking if someone is really anxious, so their brain just cannot shut down. It's hard to fall asleep already. Right. And does that mean the deep sleep is very active for anxious people and they tend to be bothered more or somewhat wake up often in the middle of the night because of this memory consolidation process?
I don't think that. So I agree that that being anxious before going to sleep impacts how well you sleep and how the number of arousals, the sleep efficiency. There's a nice study that came out, I think, a couple of years ago from Bjorn Rush's group that manipulated that and showed really these severe impacts on sleep efficiency just based on the expectancy of being tested the day after. And that is, I don't think anybody has really combined these two questions of how that impacts, not that I know of at least, impacts performance in the test, but there were studies showing that, overnight memory consolidation depends on how robust your sleep is and how solid it is, especially deep sleep, how efficient it is. On the one hand, and then these other set of studies that have shown that sleep is less sufficient if you are anticipating, if you're stressed out, and I would imagine that intuitively that the combination of two would have some severe impacts as well. I would say that it would probably be best to try, if possible, if the test is not 8 a.m. or 7 a.m., to try to set it so that you wake a few hours before the test. So don't be stressed out about waking up too late or missing the test, or try to allow yourself some time to regroup after waking up and before the test, but also preserving your sleep as much as possible. So that I think would provide the envelope for you to sleep sufficiently efficient and move from there. Yeah.
So the takeaway, I guess, is just protect yourself protect your sleep and sleep enough if you want to perform well with your memories.
For sure. Yes.
Yeah, I think one thing you mentioned is very interesting, the stage 2 sleep.
Right.
So I don't know about here, but I know a lot of Asians, since I work with Asian population more, a lot of Asians carry this idea is deep sleep is the best sleep. We have to try to have as much deep sleep as possible. And you can see even now on social media and people talk about, oh, what are the method that can increase your deep sleep. But, stage 1, 2 are more like light stage of sleep, but they are like big chunk of our night. And sounds like there's some research showing the importance of this light stage of sleep can help contribute this memory consolidation process too. So they are important too. Is that right?
Yes, so there's some evidence implicating stage 2 in motor learning specifically. There was a very influential study by Matt Walker's group in 2002 that showed that connection. For a lot of the studies that we look at, we usually group stage 2 and stage 3, which is slow wave sleep, together under this umbrella of non-REM sleep, and look at them together. There is some evidence suggesting that slow wave sleep is better than stage 2, but there's also, I think, a lot. It's the boundary between two. Anyone who's ever staged a night of sleep and looked at the polysomnography exactly and see the transition, you would see that it's somewhat arbitrary. It's a fuzzy boundary from one to the other. You start seeing slow waves more and more with progression. At some point, it falls into the stage 3 or slow wave sleep side of it. But I would say that stage 2 is, from my perspective, it's a lot of different things. It's not one very homogeneous stage. And for a lot of purposes, I usually link it together with slow wave sleep for a lot of the studies that I do.
I see. Okay. Yeah. Then how about REM sleep, which is our dreaming, right? So if deep sleep or including stage 2 sleep is for this factual memory and some motor memory, like our muscle memories, and then we dream, and nightmares happen in the dream period. I think nightmares, and we have all kinds of stories we are experiencing in dream, right? That feels like must come from memory somehow, right? And in Asian China, we have a saying that you dream is somewhat you experience during the daytime. If you think about something during daytime, it's more likely you will dream it at night. So what's the relationship between dream and memory then?
Great question. So I think I want to break that question into two things. The first is, are dreams impacted by memory? And the second is, do dreams have a function in memory consolidation? So those are two different things. The first question, yes, I think that there's a very strong impact of memory on dreams. You dream more about what happened to you on the day, usually on the day before you went to sleep. There's actually a very interesting phenomenon called the dream lag effect. And the dream lag effect shows that you dream a lot about something that happened on the day before, but you also dream more than you would expect by chance about something that happened a week before or 5 to 7 days before. So there seems to be like this, if you were to draw this little graph and show when is a memory most likely to recur in your dream, you'd see the strong peak on the day just before you went to sleep. So you dream a lot about what happened just before. Then it kind of goes down, kind of almost to zero. You don't dream a lot about things that happened 3 or 4 days before you went to sleep. And then it suddenly resurges, not to the same degree. It's not a huge bump, but you see this bump happening 5 to 7 days later. So you sometimes dream more. So you statistically, you dream more about things that happened a week before. Nobody really understands this. It's really one of those big unanswered questions in the sleep and memory literature that I think, but it's pretty well established and replicated. So it's a very interesting phenomenon that we're still trying to wrap our heads around.
Yeah.
So that's about how memory impacts dreams. The second question is, okay, but do dreams do anything, or do they just incorporate things that happen to be in our minds before? And that is, despite being a topic of active investigation for decades and more, it's still somewhat of an open question. There are some claims like that have been. So there's a great book that came out, I think it's now 2 years ago, When Brains Dream. So by Bob Stickold and Zadra. So that great book really covered a lot of the basic understanding of what we know today, and states and has a general claim that memory is important. That dreams are important, not necessarily for memory consolidation, but for creating these new associations. So these new, linking something that happened to you recently with some event in the past that might help you interpret it in ways that would increase your creativity, your productivity, in general, your cognition. So that claim is that's a strong claim, and I think the evidence is not quite there yet, though it's a very compelling hypothesis, and now that it's out there and it's relatively new, I would imagine that there will be more and more studies looking into that. Having said all that, I think that there isn't a very strong case yet right now showing that incorporating memories in dreams makes them stronger, makes them causally impacts them. So even though they are linked together, it's really not very clear if the dreams do anything for the consolidation process at this point. One last thing that I want to, so that's about dreams specifically, but about REM sleep in general. So this stage of rapid eye movements sleep, there are a few studies that do have hypotheses about what exactly it does to memories. I think that the two strongest hypotheses that are out there today is that sleep one involves emotional memory, and the idea is that REM sleep is involved in kind of the separating of the emotion that we feel when we experience an emotional memory from the facts of it. So we remember the facts, but we don't feel as, it's a negative memory, we don't feel as we don't feel it as invasive, we don't feel it as this aversive memory in a way that makes us relive the bad aspects of it. This hypothesis, also by Matt Walker, that I mentioned previous from UC Berkeley, is called the sleep to remember, sleep to forget hypothesis. And the idea there is that REM sleep helps you remember the details, but feel less overwhelmed by the emotional aspects of a memory. And again, this hypothesis has been out there for more than a decade now, and there's some support for it, but it's not as strong as we'd like. Still, I think that the hypothesis needs some refinement, because it's not the data is not entirely there, even though I think it's very compelling. So that's with regard to emotional memory. And the other thing is, as I mentioned earlier, the whole aspect of motor learning. And there are a few studies that discuss REM in that context as well, how REM might play a role in consolidating these motor memories, these memories that are non-declarative, and that there's some data about that. In general, I would say none of these data are as compelling as the data we have for declarative memory and slow wave sleep. So it's still much of a lingering question that haunts us a lot, because REM sleep is in a lot of ways the sleep that at least the stage of sleep we get most questions about when we talk to general audience. It's definitely the one that everybody's very curious about, and we know far fewer facts about that than about slow wave sleep, interestingly.
Yeah, but that's also exciting, right? That opened doors for a lot of potential research and a lot of new ways to look into that, and hopefully through time we're going to know more and more about that.
Yeah, I think that it's a very exciting time for REM sleep and for sleep in general, because we have these new tools, which probably we'll talk about further on in our conversation.
Yeah.
Just to explore it a bit. in better using better scientific methods.
Yeah, so that's actually what I want to ask you. For people who are not in this field, they possibly are not familiar. How can we study memory in sleep, or how can we study this thing we cannot touch or even see directly, right? It sounds like so difficult. So in your lab or in this field generally right now, what are some new technologies you guys are using in your lab to really study memory and sleep?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna talk about two different lines of or methods that are being used by my lab and other labs across the world. And the first one I want to talk about is designed to solve the causality question. So we have a problem with sleep. We can look at slow wave sleep, for example, and how it's correlated with memory improvement. So we have participants go to sleep. I mean, they go to sleep. We measure how much slow wave sleep they had. We measure their improvement in memory, and we can tell something about this relationship. But it's still a correlation. It's a correlation, and we don't know exactly what drives what, or maybe there's this third factor that drives both these things together. And that was one of the major, I think, obstacles in exploring sleep throughout most of years of this research. And 15 years ago, a study came out that introduced this new method called targeted memory reactivation. And here's the idea behind this method. The idea is that if we are able to kind of bias the brain or push it towards processing certain memories during sleep, then we could later, we can use that manipulation to test what exactly it is that sleep is doing. So if we are able to make the brain process whatever we want it to process, we can see later how these memories improved, how they changed over time, over sleep, relative to others that we did not bias. And the way we do this is we actually present stimuli, so sounds and odors during sleep. And we present those not in a very disruptive way. So the sounds are very low volume. The odors are not invasive odors that might make you wake up, such as the odor of the gas that's leaking from your gas line. So it's very it's relatively pleasant odors and low level sounds that are connected to certain memories. The first at least modern study that uses this technique is from Bjorn Rasch and Jan Born in 2007. And what they did was they linked an odor, in that case it was a rose odor, with a bunch of memories that participants encoded for, it was like a memory game where different items were. And then they presented that odor during sleep. And when they presented during slow wave sleep, specifically during slow wave sleep, they saw improvements in memory. They didn't see the same for REM sleep. So that's again this idea of declarative memories. So memories in this case for a specific where things are located on a screen. And since that really important study almost more than 15 years ago, that finding has been replicated many times. Importantly, one of the biggest breakthroughs was 2 years later in Ken Paller's lab at Northwestern, where they did a study that involved sounds and not odors. And the big breakthrough there was that the sounds were linked to specific memories. So it's not that the rose odor that was linked to all these different memories together, but here you had a cat's like meowing, the sound of a cat meowing linked to one of those locations on the screen where a cat was actually, you see a little image of a cat. Or you have a sound of a kettle or a sound of a harmonica or all these different sounds that are specific to things on the screen. And then later, some of these sounds, not all of them, were presented during sleep unobtrusively, low volume. Participants do not wake up. They don't remember hearing those sounds during sleep at all. But when they wake up and are tested on all these items, we see this this effect that these specific items that we played got better, whereas the others did not get as well. They don't really get better. They get less worse because there's general forgetting in general for a lot of these tasks. They don't get, so the items that we presented don't get as bad as the other ones. And since these studies, again, there's been over 100 studies with pretty impressive replications for these studies and other studies. And the big breakthrough of this method is that, so there's two things to think about. First is, now we can play around with sleep and kind of manipulate it the same way we do with other forms of cognitive tasks during wakefulness. I mean, during wakefulness, you have this plethora of tasks that are run in labs across around the globe using different techniques and different manipulations. And up until now in sleep, we were just observers, and now finally we have the chance to manipulate. And the second exciting thing about this is that it really takes us towards interventions that might be useful using these same methods, and ideas such as using these methods to treat memory-related disorders such as PTSD or major depression and other sorts of disorders that really have a memory component to them. And if we can manipulate that, we might be able to help participants during their sleep. In many ways, that's still a promise that is yet to come into fruition. And I think me and other labs are working on it in various different ways. There was one impressive achievement in the last year from Sophie Schwartz's group in Switzerland, where they used a TMR-like approach to actually alleviate nightmares in participants with nightmare disorders. So patients with nightmare disorders came into the clinic. They engaged in imagery rehearsal therapy, which is one of the therapies that are most relevant to this disorder. So they basically imagined a different scenario within their nightmare, and later during sleep, one group of these participants, this therapy, this IRT, the imagery rehearsal therapy, was reactivated. For the other, it wasn't, and they showed long, sustained, and quite impressive benefits to that group that had targeted memory reactivation. So that's, again, from this last year, just came out pretty recently, and I'm hoping this is just the first of many studies that will show. So maybe before I talk about the second, so that was all under the first of the two, but maybe before we talk about the second one that you
right. So far sounds like I learned about TMR in the recent conference. It's really cool, and that's just to get me to think clinically what we are doing, just like you said, when people are awake, right? Like when people are awake, for people really stressed out or have emotional disorders, we tend to introduce this grounding technique, also use our 5 senses. So although you talk about certain sounds, certain flavors, it can really help soothe people in a lot of situations, but that's when they are awake. Right. It sounds like as the research develops, we are able to transfer that somewhat to this more subconscious passive state. And when people are asleep, they don't have to actively learn and do something, but through combining wakeful stage, doing something, and then sleep through the night, we can also do this kind of intervention to help them somewhat for their mental health. I think that's very exciting to me, especially.
I agree. Yeah, I think it's a very exciting direction. It's I wouldn't imagine it would replace standard therapy practices, but I think it would supplement them. And specifically when we think that in some conditions, when we think that sleep plays some functional role in escalating a certain condition, or in processing memories in maladaptive ways, I think these kind of interventions will be yet useful, because up until now we didn't really have any way to do anything about what is going on during sleep. We could have done a lot about whether participants are able to sleep more or less. We do CBTI to help them to help alleviate symptoms of insomnia, to make them sleep more, and we have different interventions to make them sleep in different times, and different, so there's a lot we can do about the structure, the architecture of sleep. But here we're looking past the architecture and into the function of sleep, so if you imagine this as a building, we're not only designing the exterior walls and kind of dividing the different levels. We're talking about what's inside. We're talking about the furniture. We're talking about how these different stages look like. What do they do? What makes them unique, and how we can impact the substance and the cognitive content of sleep processing. And that's really exciting in a very new direction that up until now seemed up until a few years ago seemed like science fiction.
Yeah, right. So hopefully later there's a way for people, each of us individuals can bring some of this practice into home on our own. We can do something, right? Right now, I know a lot of this happen in lab. There has to be researchers or clinicians there guide a lot of these strategies and manipulate what happened of our memories in dream. But hopefully in the future, people can have some simpler ways to take home on their own to practice. Because for me, after reading the research, knowing a little bit of this, I was like, I don't know how to transfer this to home. I cannot just make a certain order for myself, right? A certain sound that may actually interrupt my sleep instead of help it.
Yeah, I agree. There's recent advances in that field as well. The study by Schwartz et al. That I mentioned earlier for nightmare disorder, that was actually done at home, so sleep at home, not in the clinic. There's a few recent technological advances that allow us to use may allow us in the future to use cell phones together with smartwatches or with wearables to use just for this purpose. There's a Dr. Nathan Whitmore from MIT, the postdoc at MIT, developed this algorithm that basically uses the Fitbit data to cue target memory activation during sleep without the need of electrophysiology, without EEG. Just based on Fitbit data, and I think that's just, again, this is just the first step, and there's a lot of promise in that area as well. Awesome. And there's also like more low-tech studies that use just odors presenting in the room throughout the night, and also find these nice effects as well. So there's a lot of different lines of research and are now exploring how to take this approach and out of the clinic, out of the lab or clinic, and into homes.
Okay, wow. Yeah. Very promising. Okay, look forward to that. So this is the one line of research.
Yeah, right.
Wow.
So that is targeted memory activation. The other thing I wanted to talk about a bit is that is causally manipulating sleep content, but we're also making advances in reading what the brain is processing while it's doing that. Neuroimaging techniques for ever since they came into public kind of discourse, there's been this notion of using MRI or EEG to read brains. Can you read my brain, and so on? And the answer is always, and it remains, that the technology is not there and will likely never really get there. But what we can do a lot of times is look at categories that are reactivated. So, for example, in MRI studies during wakefulness, we can know whether a participant is viewing pictures of a face of someone, or a house, or a location, and so on. So we can use neuroimaging to decode what exactly it is that they are viewing at any given time. Using similar techniques, and over the past few years, we've started to use this to kind of decode. I'm using the word decode because I'm alluding to machine learning algorithms that kind of take data and try to extract some substance out of it. So we're using these sort of techniques and new computational methods to really understand what it is that is processed at any given time in the brain. And we use this during sleep, so that just so we can look at specific periods of sleep and see which memories, or at least which category of memories, is reactivated at any given time. And that's really exciting because we can start really looking at sleep and understanding what the brain is doing, not based on the subsequent memory, or when participants wake up, how did things change, but really looking online at sleep while participants are sleeping, and using these techniques to understand what the brain is doing, at least in very coarse ways. And there are a few studies that came out over the last a few years using different techniques, but all kind of converge to this idea that we are getting close to using these techniques in more and more kind of finessed, high resolution ways, and exploring where it is that's happening during sleep. And that holds promise, I think, for a lot of different ways. First of all, as a method for us neuroscientists, it's exciting that we can get more information about the contents of sleep processing. But I also think, going back to this idea that there's some sort of maladaptive processing happening in some during sleep in some conditions, in some disorders, whether they're sleep disorders, neurological disorders, psychiatric disorders, just generally this idea that there's something awry in the brain during happening during sleep. This might pave the way towards diagnostic tools that are actually used in the clinic in these kind of situations to understand what might be going wrong there in a patient's brain, that we might be able to intervene with, or at least understand at the first point.
Wow. So if I understand it correctly, this sounds like one step further than the typical sleep study we are doing right now, right? Because in the sleep clinic, in order to diagnose a certain sleep disorder, what we can do is to do the sleep study, and you are wired up all over your body, but it's not so much about the neuroimaging. I think there's some basic EEG data, and but many other breathing and other data going in. But sounds like we can do more for the neural processing part when we sleep.
Exactly. So whereas most studies in the clinic would involve just a few electrodes, maybe five EEG electrodes, and then electrode to measure eye activity and muscles and cardiac activity. For these studies, we usually use high density EEG caps that give us rich information about activity throughout the scalp, and we can also use MRI. So we have now EEG caps and devices that are compatible with the high magnetic fields that are involved in MRI imaging, and we can have both of them together using the EEG to basically to score sleep, to know which stage of sleep we are in, together with MRI to explore more mostly spatial resolution, higher spatial resolution events and networks that will allow us to understand this better. A pioneering study from about 10 years ago looked into whether we can read dream content, at least at the category level, using MRI, and that was somewhat successful, although I think a bit limited. It was during sleep onset, so during N1, not during REM sleep. I remember correctly. In general, though, that was, I think, that kind of was the first step towards these newer techniques that we're starting to use. Even with EEG, we can, without these MRI machines, which are super expensive, busy with a lot of patient work, even without requiring MRIs, we still get quite a bit of information in the EEG. And in fact, most of my studies use EEG for that purpose, for decoding content rather than relying on MRI, even though I do have some studies that do both. So I am exploring both of these avenues, and again, it's very early days, and I think that moving forward, we'll see some substantial advances in our understanding of sleep and sleep processing based on these techniques.
Yeah, wow, amazing. Sounds like the deeper, the more you research in this with all this like new technologies, combine them, you will be able to really identify, right, normal activities, abnormal activities, and understand, help with the diagnosis process or even treatment process. And also on the other end, I'm thinking about all these fiction movies, right? Maybe one day we will really be able to know what people are dreaming about.
Yeah, I think that it's really important that you brought this up, because I would imagine that for many viewers, a lot of what I'm talking about is kind of frightening in a lot of ways. It's really, ethically, it's really concerning for a bunch of reasons. I think the first reason, and that's one of the things that makes sleep unique, is that we have these interventions without the participant conscious. And we are, so if you have an MRI study and you're looking at a participant's brain and reading out which categories they're observing, at the very least they're conscious, they're participating in the process. And here they have no control over what we might be reading. They're asleep, and I think that's something we should think about a lot, and we as a field do think about it quite a bit. And the same goes for the targeted memory reactivation interventions that I mentioned earlier. Participants obviously consent to being part of these studies, and they know that we are manipulating memories during sleep, but it doesn't involve manipulations of a person that is not fully conscious. And even with full I think even with full consent, it is something that we should keep in mind and think about more and more. And maybe the ethical aspect to it is that because these are new methods and these are new interventions, we still don't completely know what target memory activation, for example, what that might do to these other memories. I think that now, after, again, more than 100 studies in the field, we know that it doesn't create this very deep detrimental effects, or maybe even specific detrimental effects. I think that this technique has proven pretty safe in any study that has been done so far. But it is still something that whenever you do any sort of interventions that are new, you should keep in mind. And I did want to kind of not leave that in the dark. These are issues that we talk about and we think about, and they're complicated. But I think that we're doing a pretty good job of handling them at this point as a field.
Yeah. Sounds like we need to approach that definitely with caution, ethically, and reduce the harm, but also sounds like it's quite safe method right now. I definitely got a lot of questions from people, not for research, but for sleep study. A lot of people feel like if I put all these things on my body, on my brain, on my head, what if it harm me? Especially for children. I have a lot of parents worry about sleep study may hurt their children. And so they refuse to let their children checked out. But that can cause other problem, right? If the children do have sleep disorders and they don't get diagnosed, that can lead to health consequences. So I think it's important for us to talk about this as a field and to help educate the public too. What is safe? What you should consider? What are some things to think about, to discuss before and after the experiments?
Yes, I completely agree.
Yeah, great, cool. We learned so much from you, and so exciting to know all this new development in the field. So at the end, so if a lot of people who are listening or watching are very interested in this, and based on all the research all the knowledge so far, is there any final wisdom you want to share with all the audience about sleep and memory?
Maybe just one general note, which is I think that when sleep became implicated, when sleep was implicated in memory processing, I think that everyone thought the picture was pretty simple, because whereas the richness of wake life is something that we perceive consciously, we know that we have moods, we have interactions, we are different in different contexts and so on. During sleep, it seems like it's a very simple, uniform process. And it's just, okay, so there's different stages of sleep, and those are, those basically set the boundaries. And whereas wakefulness is this rich experience of a lot of different states, stage 3 or slow wave sleep is stage 3 slow wave sleep. That's it. That's what it is. And I think now with time, we're starting to acknowledge more and more that there's a richness to the way the brain processes information that is paralleled between, that is similar between wake and sleep. And we have obstacles in exploring it the same way we could explore the wake cognition. But I think that those obstacles shouldn't confuse us and shouldn't make us believe that sleep processing is one-dimensional and simple. And the more we learn about it, some of my studies have looked at memories in context. So not just these memories that, memories are hard to define in real life because they're usually part of this rich event that involves multiple moving parts. And during sleep, we don't really know how those moving parts play any role. Do they interact in sleep like they do during wakefulness? So my recent studies suggest that they do, that really sleep just during sleep is, that memory processing during sleep is as complicated and complex and layered and rich as it is during wakefulness. And I'm diving more and more into that complexity. But I do want to kind of put out there the notion that that memory processing and cognitive processing in general during sleep may prove to be as complicated and as layered as it is during wake, but it might follow completely different rules that we have to learn, that we have to figure out. And it's an exciting time to ask these questions and to explore this field.
Yeah, so keep a more open mind to this field, right? More to come in the near future, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, that's for sure, yes.
Yeah, so if our listeners want to learn more about your research, your work, where can they find you?
So they can find me on Twitter. I am TMR, that's targeted memory reactivation, TMR_et_al, so TMR et al, basically. Or they can just search my name, obviously. They can visit the lab website as well. I won't spell that out, but you can just search cognitive neuroscience and sleep, UC Irvine. That will probably be the first result that will pop up. And they're welcome to reach out. I'd love to hear people's thoughts about these ideas. I'm always open to discussing these really intriguing ideas further with anyone who's interested in exploring them.
Yes, great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Schechtman, for sharing all this nuanced research and this whole new field in sleep. And I'm sure, hopefully, anyone listening who are interested will reach out to you to discuss further.
Thank you very much.